Lord Lister is in the studio with me now. You were down at number 10. Thank you for coming to the studios, by the way. You were down at number 10 earlier today. Can I ask you, I was speaking to Rachel Johnson. She said the mood actually was quite buoyant, and the PM, because he is still PM even as we speak, was busy. He was doing selfies and everything else. How would you describe the mood?
Well, I think a lot of regret, a lot of sadness, because it shouldn't have ended like this. But he was as he always is, very buoyant. Gave a brilliant speech, gave his usual quotes at the end of it, as you get used to. And I mean, you know, he didn't sound like a man who was disappearing.
Well, what do you mean by that, Lord Lister?
I mean, look,
we're going to see him in some way, shape, or form.
We will see him in some shape or form. He has said he will fully support Liz Truss in her role as leader. But you know, politics, it's a long-term game, and lots can happen over the years to come. So I'm sure he'll be around, and we'll be seeing more of him.
You say it shouldn't have ended like this, and many would agree with you, boy. How should it have ended then, Lord Lister?
Well, I think he should have. I think he was brought down in the end by. It's hard to know what really brought him down. It's a series of things. People never forgave him for getting rid of Theresa May. There were people who never forgave him for Brexit. There were people who he hadn't promoted, or there were people he'd sacked. There were people who just didn't like him. I mean, I think it was fair to say they were always going to come for him. And the trouble was he'd left himself too exposed on too many different things. And that's what brought the end about. And I mean, it is a shame because he is still a highly talented man.
Relatively young as well.
Yes, I'm not quite sure what his age is, but it must be mid-50s, yeah, something like that.
So plenty of gas in the tank, or whatever one would say.
Absolutely. And that's what I'm saying. I'm sure we'll see more of him. And he's very committed to a number of things. He's very committed to Ukraine. And I think if there's any backsliding on that, we'll hear from him fast. And he's also a man who believes in the levelling up agenda. He was passionate about it. You will recall having him here in the studio talking about levelling up London. That was his theme at the time.
I want to take you back to London. You served as Deputy Mayor of London for policy 2011 through 2016, so a fair old chunk. How did Mr Johnson's style of leadership change from being Mayor of London to being PM, Lord Lister?
You must remember, London's a big job. But it's nothing compared to the Prime Minister's job. The stress and the strain of the PM's job is enormous. So, yes, he could be a lot more light-hearted in London than he could ever be as Prime Minister. He was also having to deal with a very big constituency. I'm talking about Parliament and also the civil service, everybody else he was having to deal with. So it was a tough gig for anybody, and it is a tough job. Anybody who does that job, it's tough. So he became much more serious.
A lot of Conservatives, whether it's Liz Truss, whether it's Boris Johnson, are saying the party needs unity now. I can't remember the last time the Conservative Party was that united. It seems at times riven with plotting and scheming.
Well, I think goes with the territory, isn't it? I'm sorry.
Why does it with the Conservatives? By the way, I think you're absolutely right, but I can't work out why.
Well, I don't think it's actually much better in the Labour Party or the Liberal Party, to be fair. It's just they're not in power.
They're not as good at it.
I think, look, a lot of MPs, they go into Parliament, their ambition is to become a minister. Their ambition is, they all believe they can become Prime Minister one day. And then slowly that changes as the years roll by. It's a very ambitious place. And so I think there is always a degree of plotting and scheming going on.
What was the biggest change? What surprised you most about the working atmosphere at number 10 as opposed to the working atmosphere at City Hall?
Well, obviously scale is one thing.
But what about the mood, the people around him?
It was. You had a. Remember, it's a bit of a bubble, Downing Street. It's relatively small numbers of people. I mean, there's 300 people in Downing Street. So it's pretty big, but they're spread around a very large building, and what you got there was a lot of very committed people, and you having to. Everybody believes the Prime Minister has absolute power. The Prime Minister doesn't. The Prime Minister has to work through ministers, and he has his main power is influence, and he has to use that. It's quite a lot of soft power that he actually has. I mean, at the end of the day, yes, of course, he can fire somebody, so yes, of course, he has ultimate power. But the day-to-day workings have to be with ministers. While in somewhere like City Hall, you could get your hands around it. You could actually hold it quite tightly. You could see what was going on. You could spot things much, much easier than you can in Downing Street, where you have to rely on Secretaries of State and ministers to spot some of these things.
Let's look at Mr Johnson's speech. She said, you'll probably recall, the rules were changed halfway through. Lord Lister, does he have a point? He did survive a no-confidence vote. Shouldn't he have been allowed to stay on?
Well, I personally think he should have been allowed to stay on. I think he should have gone through the next election. And I think, the time, if there was going to be change, it should have been midterm in the next Parliament. I thought he was going to survive all this. I very regret that he didn't, because he's got a fantastic track record. And history, I think, is going to be quite kind to him because of the achievements he's made.
You know him better than most. What will he actually do now in the next few weeks and months?
I think he's going to
He's not a man of reflection, is he, really?
No.
Doesn't reflect at all.
And you must remember, he's a man of enormous hard work. He really does work hard from morning till night. So he's not going to sit around thinking about things. I'm sure he'll do some writing, and I think some of that will be well worth reading because he's a brilliant writer.
He is, yes.
He's going to make a lot of speeches. I'm sure he's going to get his finances back together, which he needs to because he's hasn't been earning much while he's been in Downing Street. And he's got a lot of expenses. And then he needs to take stock.
Some would say his salary is quite high, though. I have to put that to you, 140, 150, whatever it is. But the lifestyle that he has, perhaps not enough, one would argue.
Well, let's not go into that. But the point is that he's going to be back. He'll be doing some things. I hope he'll have another big job, which is what I'd like to see. Not necessarily in Parliament, but on the world stage.
Your advice to Liz Truss?
I think she's got to heal as best she can the wounds of the Conservative Party. She's got to have a relatively broad church in the cabinet so she can bring everybody together. And then she's got to deliver on her commitments to deal with the cost of living crisis, which is the single biggest issue now. And there's lots of different policy strands that are going to run from that. But that is going to fill her inbox. But the trouble is, having worked in Downing Street, events have a horrible habit of overtaking whatever you think you're going to do. We have a war in Ukraine. We have tensions in the South China Sea. We have issues around the world. There are all sorts of things out there, and any one of them can derail this.
Can the Conservatives win in 2020, assuming they go to 2024? Will they win?
It's her election to lose. And I think if she actually, I think the telling thing will be she gets through the appointment of the cabinet is seen to work, she starts to get to grips with the cost of living crisis, starts to deal with the energy issues, starts to deal with those things by Christmas. I think then we'll have a pretty good idea of where she stands. I think she will. I think she's a great campaigner. And look, to be fair, the Tory party election process does actually test people. And she has proved to be a campaigner. So I think she can, and I think she's got the ability to do, and I think she can be one of the great prime ministers. But she's got to hit the ground running, and that's going to be hard.
Finally, the Privileged Committee inquiry goes on into former Prime Minister Boris Johnson. Some have said it's a stitch-up. Do you share that view?
I think it's awfully... The man's gone. He made a statement to Parliament. He's apologised for it, but they're still going after him. It does sound as though it just sounds vicious and nasty, and I think it should end.
Lord Lister served as Chief of Staff and Chief Strategic Advisor to Prime Minister Boris Johnson, also worked with him as Deputy Mayor of London and was a long-term leader of Wandsworth Council. Thanks for coming by the studio. Have yourself a good day. Grateful for your time. 9:31. Let's get the LBC News headlines.